96% of all problems in revenue cycle are not caused by your biller. I don't live in the world of just what I think and accusation. I live in the world of data and what I know. And the right data tells you what you need to know to understand how things really work. It's just super important that you have baseline data. You can at least start to understand what baseline normal is for you. You want to reduce complexities. You want to create a condition where this is as simple as it can be so the outcomes are consistent. And it's the disconnect between time supply and time demand that creates outcomes that are suboptimal. And what the AR audits allow us to do is understand the complexities and the problems from a little bit different angle. The AR audit is absolutely critical to do.
Robert Kowalick is the founder and CEO of Revenue Cycle Solutions, LLC, where he oversees the delivery of comprehensive revenue cycle management services for healthcare private practices. He is also the founder and CEO of Ascend Solutions, LLC, the creator of the Practice Data Solutions, a billing intelligence data platform designed to provide actionable insights and optimize financial performance across medical practices.
What we do is we categorize the reason that the claim is in AR and unpaid. Again, we collect a lot of raw data, then we use raw data to do calculations, and then we use calculations to really create metrics that mean something. So ultimately, that's the final value in your data outputs, is leading you down a path of actionable intelligence. Here's the 3 things that matter this month. What am I going to go fix now? You know what? Lots of revenue cycles need rehab as well. That's what we're doing in rehabbing your revenue cycle. Hi, everyone. Bob Kowalick here, your host of Rehabbing Your Revenue Cycle. Today's episode, I'm going to talk about must-have revenue cycle management metrics. This is a thing I could talk about for far too long. I'm going to try to keep this to an hour. For context, first of all, if you remember from early episodes, I talked about the 3 phases or 4 phases of revenue cycle. Phase number 1 is the conversion of provider time into potential revenue. There's a lot of metrics in there around productivity, maximizing the potential value of time through coding and coding distributions and conversion of time into units and all kinds of things. So that phase I'm not covering today. That'll be a separate episode. Second phase is converting potential revenue to cash and the kinds of metrics that you would ideally be tracking to understand how that goes. And that's what today's really about, is data metrics around that part of the revenue cycle, conversion of potential revenue to cash, which is where most of the revenue cycle functions and time goes. The other phase was keep the cash, which is being stable and protecting yourself against post-payment audits and returning money and all that kind of stuff. And we're not going to be talking about that today. So today is must-have metrics for the middle phase of revenue cycle, the conversion of potential revenue to cash. A couple of just contextual points here. So I think of data and metrics, first understanding that to have any metric, to have any calculation, to have any analytics, to have anything, you have to have raw data. And so everything starts with raw data. Without raw data, you can't build, right? So I think of raw data like Legos, right? And the more of the different kinds of Lego pieces you have, the better. You'll be able to build all kinds of really cool stuff, with those raw data pieces, with those Legos. And so you want to make sure you have all the raw data you need. And there is a huge, I would say, concentration of raw data in the traditional same old raw data that every EMR and PM out there puts out. And then there's a whole set of raw data that we create around time and time analytics, which is super critical to understand as well. So not everyone has equal access to all the raw data that you could possibly have to create all of the kinds of metrics that you could possibly create. So, but think about metrics starting from raw data, and what raw data you have ultimately determines, either opens the door to endless possibilities or limits your ability to create metrics. So what we want is the broadest base of raw data we can get. And then we want to have really good logic and math applied to the raw data to, create the most valuable information, intelligence. That's ultimately what we're after about how revenue cycle business is functioning and succeeding or not succeeding. So from raw data, we go to calculations, right? So simple calculations with raw data, like I have my visit counts and I want to know what my visits per day is. So I divide by the number of business days in a month. That's a calculation, simple two-part type of math involved to go from raw data to calculations. I have revenue and I have visits. So I want to know revenue per visit. Simple math, divide my revenue by my visits. So calculations are combining or doing simple math with raw data. Above calculations are metrics. Metrics are things like taking different calculations and combining them into more meaningful pieces of information. Like I am breaking my visits down by payer classes, which I define payer classes. So your visits across payer classes is essentially your payer mix. And we could go so detailed into payer mix by every single payer that you have, but we tend to start with a payer mix view of things. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so we're now combining visits and organizing it by a certain classification of type of payer. I guess since I'm already on it, let me just say that you need enough payer classes to represent all the different kinds of payers that you have. So Medicare, CMS, official US government Medicare is a payer. We consider it to be a payer class because it's usually a high enough percentage of volume that it should be tracked as a payer class. Very different than your Medicare replacement plans, your Medicare Advantages. Those are not Medicare. They pay completely differently. They pay different in amounts. They pay different in timing. They pay different in complexity. So absolutely, you should be separating all of your Medicare replacements into a different kind of payer class than your Medicare. If those are combined and considered to be all Medicare, then you have very poor visibility into what's really going on in Medicare itself. So we need to segment and separate out the types of payers to create the right amount of detail at the payer mix level. So Medicare, Medicare replacements, separate payer classes. Medicaid, right? Again, CMS Medicaid versus a Medicaid HMO or an Obamacare plan, at the state level. Very different payers. So those need to be segregated. Commercial insurance that pays you on a fee schedule. I'm going to submit a number of CPT codes and units attached, and what I ultimately am paid is based on what the payer does with what I've submitted to them on the claim in terms of CPTs and units versus a per diem commercial insurance. It's just going to pay you $70 for PT or whatever, no matter what you submit, as long as you surpass a certain minimum units for a visit. You're not getting any more money if you submitted 3 or 4 or 5 units. It's the same dollars. You're getting $70 no matter what. Those are completely different kinds of payers, not only in terms of amount, but in terms of time and in terms of complexity. So we look at every payer by the method that it pays, the structure that it's part of, the complexity attached to it, and separate payers into payer classes. Our standard payer class view of the world has 17 different payer classes. So if you're in a software that comes off the shelf and says you have 5 payer classes they can give you, don't use that software. It's crap. If you're having to take individual payers, dump them into Excel and pivot tables and to combine outside of the billing software in order to get payer class level data, move on. Pick something that's more sophisticated on the back end. Yeah, this is a pet peeve. Obviously, you could probably sense this in my tone, but it's just super
You
important
look
that
at
the quality of the outputs that you get from your systems, from your EMR, from your PM, from your clearinghouse, in the context of you as a revenue cycle business, not as a physical therapy provider. and different software programs, applications, platforms, whatever you want to call them, out there have approached the data side very differently and in hugely varying degrees of quality, accuracy, difficulty, simplicity to get information. And, again, I started life as a clinician, went into private practice. We did our own billing, went off to help others get paid. Now we've evolved into revenue cycle management and time analytics. And, it's such a different type of view of the world today. I can tell you from where I sit today, which is hard for this statement to just be accepted as the way it is, but the back end, the PM, the billing platform and what it does and how it produces data is more important than the front end. So, and this is where most fully integrated systems that are in the market have wide variance in how well they support you as a revenue cycle business. They could be great on the front end, awful on the back end, and you have to have the whole package. If you don't, you're just missing a lot. So anyway, we take raw data and we do calculations, and we take multiple calculations like a payer mix, which is a combination of visits and payer classifications combined right into a different kind. That's a metric. It's more than a calculation. If we then take payer mix and apply something like an expected time to pay to that, then we get into what we call the target average days outstanding. Now we're into another level of metric or data, what I refer to as analytics. We also want to be comparing movements in metrics over time. So trending, right, in our critical metrics, you need to have short-term trends and long-term trends, and you need to have targets, and you need to look at what's going on in metrics relative to what you need to get the outcomes that you need, right? The metrics are telling you a story. They're a mirror. You're standing in the mirror and you're seeing what you got. And that's what good data is. It's the mirror. It tells you exactly what things look like. So we also want to be comparing metrics changing over time to other metrics changing over time. We call this relative metrics. So how is your payer mix changing over time relative to your days and accounts receivables? Two completely different metrics, but when looked at in the context of them being related to each other, relative metrics becomes really important, because if your payer mix is changing over time to a mix that takes longer to pay, then your expectations about time to get paid have to move in lockstep and in sync with the change of the payer mix. So you have to understand days in AR in the context of your payer mix. And this is why we do things like calculate not only how long it's taking to get paid, average days outstanding, ADO, whatever you want to call it, but we also then look at the payer mix and the time to pay expectations around the payer mix and how the payer mix creates a target for time to pay, and then comparing the target time to pay with the actual time to pay. We call that an ADO score. Now we're into the analytics world and how we're translating, putting, again, that we have the same raw data everybody has, but we're getting to analytical metric called an ADO score, where others just stop at ADO. So you think about these as like Legos, and you can be this master Lego builder that converts Legos into really cool stuff or just basic stuff. And what we've seen over the years is that most software platforms that are in the industry just give you basic stuff. And it is by far not enough. It is very inadequate to really understand your business from a revenue cycle perspective. And then once you have enough analytics, right, and multiple kinds of analytics outputs, and looking at how these perceptions change over time and these calculations change over time, now you're really into business intelligence and understanding things. So we combine typical clinical data, visits, right? So you've got your normal stuff that everybody has. What were my visits? What were my claims counts? What were my charges? What did I collect? What were my adjustments? What's my accounts receivables balance? What's my aging? Everybody pretty much gives you those things. What were my adjustments? Don't remember if I already said that one, but there's 7 or 8 basic data points that come out of any software platform. But how we combine these and use the one thing and combine raw data into calculations and into metrics and then compare them to other raw data that we've combined into other metrics and compare them to each other and then how they change over time. This is the level that you really need to be at to understand your business from a revenue cycle perspective and really know what's going on. Another just, quick contextual point. Let's say your revenue per visit one month dropped compared to the month before. What does that mean? What is your intuition? What do you naturally assume is happening? My revenue per visit went from $100 a visit to $95 a visit from this month to last month. What are you thinking? Most people are thinking something's wrong with billing. My AR must, I didn't collect money. Okay, well, no. I mean, that is one possible explanation, but there's probably 6 or 7 different explanations for why revenue per visit can change. Starting with the simplest, most obvious. Well, if this month was a 23-day month and last month was a 20-day month, and my average days outstanding in AR is 26 days, my revenue this month was based on my production last month. And because my visit count went up, or maybe I was doing a great job on my marketing and I saw a bunch more new patients this month. So my visit counts went up, not just because the month had more days in it, but because I was actually generating more production of new patients, which translates into more visits. So because my visit count is up this month, but my revenue for this month was determined based on my production from last month, I could be doing a great job in marketing and see my revenue per visit drop and freak out and think that something's bad, when in fact, there's nothing bad. It's an awesome outcome that my revenue per visit went down this month because my visit counts were up. And then next month, it's kind of catch up to itself. And so you have to understand how all of these different metrics, what drives them, what could possibly move them. So yes, I mean, if my number of days in the month and my production in terms of visits and new patients was a constant and my revenue per visit went down, then I'm going to look at, okay, did my AR go up? That's a relative metric. If I see a movement in one metric, I should automatically know where to go and look at a different metric to kind of judge the movement in the metric that I'm interested in understanding. So I'll stick with the example of revenue per visit. So if my AR went up and my revenue per visit went down and my visits counts per day normalized to per day of everything normalized per day, which is something you definitely want to do every month, then you could say, all right, well, now what I have is a collection problem, a getting paid problem. So was it that my biller didn't spend enough time in my accounts receivables so that my AR went up? Absolutely could be the case. How do you even know how much time your biller should have spent? Most have absolutely no idea, even if you do billing for yourself. And this is why we go down into the world of new types of raw data, because the traditional, same old, everybody has access to raw data no longer cuts it in understanding revenue cycle. This is why we've created raw data on time per task in billing. We track time in 50 different billing tasks. Not all billing tasks are created equal. Not all billing tasks will have the same potential impact on outcome. But you need to understand time by task in billing. If you are doing billing in-house, or if you're a revenue cycle company like us, you need to know to the fraction of a minute how much time is being spent in every single task that everybody in your billing team does. So that task time is super critical raw data to have. The other raw data that we create that no one creates is the complexity data around what kinds of things are happening from whatever source this complexity can come from that are going to cause billing time to actually go up. In prior episodes, I've talked about the relationship between how revenue cycle complexity drives up billing time demand and how billing time supply has to match time demand. If you don't have data that allows you to understand the complexity volume in the visit volume that you have, and the volume of encounters as affected by the complexity variables, whether it's credentialing issues, auth management, VOB, patient registration, whatever it is. We've talked about this already in the past, but we need to quantify these data points as well. This is raw data, understanding, well, how many patient registration errors did I have this month? Not only how many patient registration errors, but how did it break down into information gathering? How, was it the correct insurance? Did I register the patient, under a wrong address? So, whether it's patient registration or authorization management, did I get an auth when one was needed? Was I told by the payer I didn't need one, so I didn't get one, and then I get a rejection for no auth? On and on and on. We have raw data on 280 different sources of complexity. The payers make mistakes, the systems make mistakes, the clearinghouse could make a mistake. But most of what we see is that the internal practice operational things, the revenue cycle functions outside of billing, are what creates the most complexity. 78% of it comes from the combination of credentialing, auth management, patient registration, verification of benefits, clinical documentation quality, supporting coding, modifier usage, medical necessity support, all of these things that are everyday functions and tasks that happen within the practice. Ultimately, the human errors and omissions in this area ultimately determines how much complexity there is in the system as a whole, right? I mean, system is a global term, like everything, the EMR, the PM, the clearinghouse, the practice functions, the billing operation itself, the payers, the payer mix, right? So anyway, this is why we want the broadest scope of raw data we can have, including time-based data, including complexity raw data, so that we can combine, because we combine time-based data and complexity-based data with volume-based data, with payer mix-based data to understand time demand. If you don't even know what your billing time demand is on a per visit basis, how can you possibly accurately staff a billing operation? You can't. It's shooting darts in the dark. Maybe you're lucky and you just happen to have the right time supply. But in today's world, we need to be much more sciencey about this. So, there's a lot of reasons to have the right raw data to combine it into the right metrics. So I'm going to go through a bunch of metrics that we always calculate, always create, to understand the conversion of potential revenue to cash and the things that are either contributing to the outcomes that we want. And if you've listened to me in the past, you know that our 4 revenue cycle objectives are: number 1, maximize conversion of provider time into potential revenue. We're not talking about that today. And then convert 100% of that potential revenue to cash, convert it to cash as quickly as you can in terms of calendar days, and do those 2 things: convert it at 100% rate as quickly as possible. Want both of those to happen as efficiently and cost effectively as you can. If those are the 3 universal revenue cycle objectives, and they are, then you cannot possibly understand the efficiency component of revenue cycle without time-based data. And so if you outsource to a billing service, a revenue cycle management partner, whatever you want to call them, and they're not calculating, they're not quantifying complexity variables, not just telling you that, hey, we see a lot of authorization issues. Hey, we see a lot of registration issues. Okay, good information, good to know. But in today's world, you need to know the baselines of how all of these different functions are supporting your revenue cycle objectives, because you are a revenue cycle business doing whatever specialty you do for revenue. So yeah, that's, kind of a high level understanding of how all this fits together. It is complicated, but what we try to do is organize data in a way to simplify getting data, getting metrics, getting analytics, getting intelligence, and then how do you use it? It is super, super important. And I would say more important now than ever. We're in the world of AI now, right? So everybody's talking about AI. Everyone's somehow or another doing something in the AI space. And you, no matter what your business model is, whether you're a PT clinic and other type of specialty provider, no matter what it is, fill in the blank, that and no matter what EMR you use, or billing software you use, or clearinghouse you use, or what your structure is and billing side of things, you are going to be affected by AI. And I have a whole episode coming up where I interview one of the world's leading AI experts that I've been working with now for about a year. And we're going to talk about AI and what's coming and how it's going to impact, people and businesses. And it is a disruptor. And we're not trying to scare anybody. But 2 years from now, and I think that's the window, every healthcare administrative role that there is will be redefined as a role supporting automations with humans in the loop. So we're going to be going from it's just humans doing tasks to it's automations in integration with humans that are doing tasks. And so every administrative function has to be rethought in the context of how humans support automations and how automations support humans. So everything's going to change. So we have an episode on that coming up. But my point here related to metrics is if change is coming, and change is a constant, right? There's about 1 million people have said that. You need to know what normal is for you right now. And you need to know it in enough detail that when changes happen, whether they're strategically chosen, timed changes that you've decided to make, or they're changes that were forced on you by forces external to you that you're just going to have to deal with. If you do not know what your normal is now, that when change happens, whether it was your decision and timing to change or not, how can you possibly know whether or not that change has moved you in a better direction? You can't know. I mean, ultimately, you can know by what's my bank account look like, but that's a pretty big metric, right? That is probably the biggest rear-facing, metric there is. What we want to do is understand metrics in the context of what metrics tell us how it's actually worked. So we're looking back in time, the metrics telling us what happened last month, versus what kinds of metrics do we need to have today that are leading indicators that will say, well, based on this happening today, if this happened every day going forward, then I should already be able to predict what next month looks like. And so, there's a concept of trailing indicators, which is, all right, the rear view mirror. It's looking at what's behind you. What's my revenue per visit now? That's a trailing indicator. How many visits did I see, last month? Trailing indicator. What's my accounts receivables balance? Trailing indicator. What's my AR aging? Trailing indicator. How much time did my billing team spend today on specific tasks relative to my time demand? That's a right now in the present moment indicator. And if there's a gap there, I guarantee you that gap is going to cause your next trailing indicator, next time you look at your accounts receivables, to be further from where it should be. There's so much about time demand and complexity and billing, and the complexity is going up. The data around how well the world is doing at keeping track of, these things, it's kind of alarming. So nationally right now, and again, this is physical therapy based data, 2025 based data, claim denial rates are 41%. And it's because complexity is way up. Getting paid by Medicare Advantage plans is way more complicated than getting paid by Medicare. So as the payer world changes, systems changes, all kinds of changes are happening. Hiring changes. COVID made the labor force a very different kind of labor force. We struggle. Everyone struggles with finding the right people, keeping people, the right amount of people on your staff, trained, all that kind of stuff. But so all this complexity variables are driving denial rates up. The average cost per denied claim is $118 per claim. So multiply that by volume of claims, it's a lot of money. 60% of all denials in the US are never resubmitted, which leaves 12-ish% of all the revenue on the table, never to be collected. So most 72% of practices have insufficient capacity to deal with all of this. We spend 58% of all of our time on 4 out of 50 tasks. And those are the 2 AR statusing tasks and denial management tasks. And I've said this in the past that when we look at our high complexity group of clients compared to our low complexity group of clients, the high complexity above 30 per 100 can inflate the billing time demand by 4,000%. That's 40x. And there's not a single human dependent business process on the planet that can work under a 40x time variance, depending upon complexities out of your control. So the amount of time spent on this is just enormous. So there's just huge problems. In the US, they're getting worse, they're getting greater. And over time, these are the things that we ultimately need to solve, right? So, and data is how we're going to do, is where the start is. The foundation is data. Better data opens the door to better process, as long as you use the data and you're able to and willing to optimize process. More optimized process creates better outcomes. Better outcomes means it's a better business. And by that, what I mean is it's a more valuable business. So AI is there. It's coming. We got to talk coming up on that. And it's going to change you. It's going to change everything that you do. And if you're going into that kind of change without even understanding present reality, what your current normal looks like, it's going to be impossible for you to understand what has changed with change. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of the analysis level metrics that we create. Number one metric from an analysis perspective is a metric I call ADO score. I've already mentioned it here today, but you have to calculate ADO scores. ADO score is the ultimate judge and jury about how revenue cycle is working. It's a high level trailing indicator, but you need to know it. And to know ADO score, you have to know your average days in outstanding. Average days in outstanding is easy to calculate. Take your total accounts receivables balance. You can segment that into patient AR and insurance AR, which you should, but you want to have an insurance only AR score. So it would be your insurance AR. You want to have your total ADO or AR balance, which is your insurance plus your patient. So you take your accounts receivables balance, you divide it by your production, your gross charges, what you bill out on average every month. You should use a 3-month rolling average on production so that you don't get data jumping all over the place that's really not meaningful. So we do most of our calculations and analytics based on 3-month rolling averages. So you're dividing AR by production, by gross charge, and that gets you normalized to the day. So if I bill out $1 million a month, if my accounts receivables balance is $1 million, I divide 1 million by 1 million. That number is 1. And then I multiply by 30 to get to a month. So I could say under that math, my average days outstanding is 30 days. Okay, 30 days. If I bill out $1 million a month and my accounts receivables balance is $500,000, same math, 500 divided by 1 million, 500,000 divided by 1 million is 1/2, right? 0.5 times 30 is 15. My average days outstanding is 15 days. The flip side, if I bill out $1 million a month and my AR balance is $2 million, 2 divided by 1 is 2 times 30. My average days outstanding is 60 days. So you know how long it's taking you to get paid through simple math. But that's not good enough because there's this thing called payer mix. And different payer classes is why you need 17 payer classes, not 5. You need to attach a expected time to pay based on the type of payer that it is. Will litigation pay you the same in the same time frame as Medicare? And that's a facetious, rhetorical question. Obviously not. It could take you a year to get paid in litigation. We have Medicare in some states at 10 days, 12 days, 14 days. In some states, it's 20 days. So you need to know what normal is for that, payer class. Does workers' compensation pay you in the same time frame that Medicare pays? Absolutely not. Do per diem payers pay you in the same time frame as fee schedule payers? Believe it or not, no. Some cases they may, in other cases they don't. Does Medicaid pay you in the same rate, right? Does a state level Medicaid plan pay you the same as CMS Medicaid? So for every payer class you have, you need to know your target ADO. So we go through a lot of motion to know target ADOs for every single client based on their payer mix. And payer mixes are not static. It's a dynamic piece of a revenue cycle business. This month, I saw more workers' compensation patients than last month. Then next month and the following month, my ADO is going to be affected by that. So you can't possibly know what normal should be if you don't understand your practice in the context of payer mix. So we apply target ADOs. Now, if over time, let's say you've made an assumption of 30 days, but you're actually performing, your actual ADO is 24, and you've been like that for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, you change your target ADO from 30 to 24. The opposite is not true. You never say, well, my target ADO is 30 days, but I'm actually running 50. You don't change it to 50. The only way we ever raise a target ADO is if we have data from those payers in that payer class that shows that the fastest time to pay a payer ever pays, from claim submission to payment posting and nothing else needed to happen. There was no AR follow-up. Claim was submitted, claim was paid, claim was posted. We take a sampling of those claims to say that fastest time to pay is the time that we should expect all claims to be paid in. And the fact that it's taking longer is an indication that there's problems, there's complexities, there's things that are preventing that. And we want to know that. So we don't raise target ADOs. There was one time where categorically we did raise target ADO. During COVID, workers' comp turnaround times was 30 to 45 days longer than outside of COVID. So we made adjustments there. So we take our actual ADO and we divide it by our target ADO and we get an ADO score. This concept of scoring metrics is super important. Most important metrics worth knowing should be scored. So we're looking at an ADO score. Our target is between 95% and 105%. That's our target. And an accurate ADO score requires an accurate target ADO. So there's lots of really, really important metrics, but ADO score is absolutely one of the most important metrics that you have. If you all you know is ADO, you know half the picture. You need to know the target side to get a score, to know how things are working. And then because payer mixes change, as we've already discussed, target ADOs change and you're constantly calculating. So we've built systems and math models to automatically adjust the calculations based on the payer mix every month. So, and it may not change more than 2 or 3 or 4% from one month to another. Maybe you're doing a lot of marketing and you're targeting a specific kind of payer, and all of a sudden you had success and you got a lot more new patients now coming in from a local business that has, a certain kind of insurance that is actually one that you want. It's got high financial value. We've talked about that in past episodes. Great. How do you know that your ADO score is accurate? Because your targets are set up to automatically adjust based on the change in the payer mix. Payer mix is a critical calculation based on raw data of visits by payer to be tracking over time to show how one metric is changing relative to payer mix change. If you're not tracking payer mix change over time, it's very difficult for you to really understand and explain accurately why things change. So ADO score, super, super, super important. Payer mix itself, super important. We've already talked about that. You also want to be tracking the change in payer mix over time, month over month, year over year. I had a client call a week ago, someone whose revenue per visit is declining. And, one of the main contributors to that was a non-favorable evolution of payer mix over time, a change in payer mix to less favorable reimbursement. So you have to understand your simple calculation of revenue per visit in the context of something like payer mix, and have expectations based on payer mix change. And if your payer mix is changing in a way that you don't like, then you have to change how you get patients, your marketing. So all these things are interrelated. We create what's called a revenue per visit score. So again, we can calculate easily what revenue per visit is, revenue collections divided by visits. But again, because payer mix changes revenue per visit expectations, we want to be looking at the drivers of potential revenue, the structural things that are having the practice, and how those are changing over time to understand what the potential for revenue is. So CPT coding, raw data, how many 97110s did I bill out? How many 97530s? Units per visit, a calculation. But units per visit and CPT distribution, a calculation based on raw data, tells me what my potential revenue is in terms of converting potential revenue or time into potential revenue. My payer mix change over time also determines what my revenue per visit could be. So we track change in CPT coding and distributions and units per visit against changes in payer mix and what payers do with that CPT change to say, well, based on these drivers, these leading metrics, these variables that determine ultimately what you're going to be paid, how are those things changing over time to say, well, if we were optimized and always coding in a way that has the highest potential revenue, and we're marketing in a way that provides a favorable payer mix to revenue, we're tracking how those changes over time, and we do calculations with those, then we can actually estimate what our potential revenue is and our potential revenue per visit is based on visit volume. That's 3 different data points, raw data points, calculations, all combined into a relative metric that says, how are we doing against a target? So that's a revenue per visit score. We do the same exact thing with in PT, we do it with plan of care length. So we have a plan of care length score. So now what we're doing is we're looking at, all right, well, how many visits per plan of care? Really easy math. Divide visits by the number of new patients. I saw 1,000 visits last month. I had 100 new patients. My plan of care length is 10. That simple. You don't need to go into every single patient, count how many visits they had, and then roll them all up and add it all together. Visits divided by new patients will tell you your plan of care length. Your diagnosis mix, raw data, diagnosis codes, raw data, diagnosis mix calculation. Diagnosis mix has expectations around plan of care lengths. Payer mix, right? Do you have a bunch of payers that are rationing your visits? You get 4 and then you got to reauthorize, and it's not likely you ever get more than 6, right? So, and again, this may be sounding way too complicated, but it is absolutely important that you have systems that are designed and developed in a way that does all this for you on an ongoing basis.